They told her she was irrelevant. They told her she was just a trophy wife past her prime. When Clara Vance walked into her husband's law firm to sign the divorce papers, she didn't scream, she didn't fight, and she didn't beg for a single penny. She just signed and went silent. Her ex-husband, the tech mogul Richard Vance, thought he had won the ultimate victory. But he had no idea that Clara's silence was actually a countdown. 72 hours later, a single paparazzi photo taken 3,000 miles away would go viral, destroy Richard's stock price, and reveal a secret identity that Clara had been hiding for 15 years. This is the story of the quietest revenge in history. The conference room on the 45th floor of the Holloway and Finch building in downtown Manhattan smelled of stale coffee and expensive leather. It was a cold, sterile environment designed to intimidate. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a city that Richard Vance believed he owned. Richard sat at the head of the mahogany table checking his Rolex Submariner every 30 seconds. He drummed his fingers on the polished wood, a rhythmic, irritating sound that echoed in the silence. Sitting next to him was Bella Saunders, his 24-year-old marketing assistant, and now his public fiancée. She was popping chewing gum, scrolling through Instagram on her phone, looking bored rather than guilty. Across from them sat Clara. Clara Vance at 38 looked tired. She wore a simple beige trench coat over a white blouse, her brown hair pulled back in a loose, unassuming bun. She wore no jewelry. Her ring finger was bare, leaving a pale tan line where a 3-carat diamond had sat for 12 years. "We don't have all day, Clara," Richard said, his voice dripping with that familiar condescension. It was the voice he used when he was explaining simple concepts to investors he deemed unintelligent. "The terms are generous. More than generous, considering." "Considering you brought nothing to the table but a pretty face," Bella muttered without looking up from her phone. Richard smirked, placing a hand on Bella's arm to quiet her, though he clearly enjoyed the dig. "My lawyers have outlined everything. You get the condo in Jersey, you get the 2019 Audi, and a lump sum alimony payment of $50,000. In exchange, you waive all rights to VanceTech's future earnings, stock options, and intellectual property. It's a clean break." Mr. Henderson, Richard's high-priced attorney, slid the heavy stack of documents across the table. The paper made a rasping sound against the wood. "Mrs. Vance," Henderson said, his tone professional but pitying, "I must advise you that if you do not sign this today, Richard is prepared to drag this through litigation. Given the prenup you signed a decade ago, you could end up with significantly less." Clara didn't look at Henderson. She didn't look at Bella, who was now inspecting her manicured nails. She looked straight at Richard. For 12 years she had been the invisible engine behind him. When VanceTech was nothing but a laptop in a garage, Clara was the one who coded the back end of the logistics algorithm while Richard slept. When they nearly went bankrupt in 2018, it was Clara who sold her grandmother's jewelry to make payroll. When Richard had panic attacks before board meetings, she was the one who wrote his speeches, fixed his tie, and pushed him onto the stage. But Richard had rewritten history. In his mind, he was the sole genius. Clara was just the woman who made the coffee and kept the house clean. "Are you going to cry?" Richard asked, leaning forward, searching her face for a sign of weakness. "Please don't cry. It's embarrassing." Clara remained silent. Her face was a mask of absolute calm. It wasn't the calm of surrender. It was the calm of a deep frozen lake. She reached into her purse. Richard flinched slightly, perhaps expecting a weapon or a subpoena. Instead, Clara pulled out a cheap plastic ballpoint pen. She ignored the expensive Mont Blanc fountain pen Mr. Henderson offered her. She flipped to the last page. "Clause 14b, she said softly. It was the first time she had spoken in an hour. Her voice was steady, lacking any tremor. "The non-disclosure agreement. It states that neither party can discuss the financial inner workings of VanceTech or the source of its initial capital investment." "Standard boilerplate," Henderson said quickly. "Protects Richard's trade secrets." "And mine," Clara said enigmatically. Richard laughed, a harsh barking sound. Yours, Clara, your only trade secret is your lasagna recipe. Just sign the damn papers so Bella and I can catch our flight to Cabo. Clara looked down at the paper. The words swam before her eyes. Legal jargon dismantling a decade of her life. She thought about the nights she stayed up debugging code. She thought about the humiliations. The lipstick on his collar. The way he gradually stopped introducing her as his partner and started introducing her as his wife. She pressed the pen to the paper. Scritch, scritch. She signed Clara E. Vance. Then she closed the folder and slid it back. Done, she whispered. Richard grabbed the folder, immediately checking the signature as if he expected her to have drawn a middle finger. Finally, he exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. You made the right choice, Clara. You're not built for this world. You need a quiet life. Go back to Jersey, find a nice librarian or something. Bella stood up, linking her arm through Richard's. Bye, Clara. Leave the key card at the front desk. They didn't even wait for her to leave. They turned their backs, already discussing dinner reservations and stock prices. Clara stood up slowly. She gathered her purse. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't slam the door. She walked out of the conference room, down the long corridor lined with portraits of Richard receiving awards she had applied for on his behalf, and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, shutting out the sight of the life she had built and lost, Clara didn't cry. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a second phone, a sleek black device with no brand markings. She turned it on. There was one unread message. Sender, The Palace. Message. The jet is fueled at Teterboro. Her Highness is waiting. Are you free? Clara typed a single-word reply, free. While Richard Vance was popping a bottle of Dom Perignon in the back of his limousine, celebrating his freedom, Clara was stepping into a very different kind of vehicle. She took a yellow taxi to a private hangar at Teterboro Airport, a place usually reserved for the elite of the elite, a circle Richard Vance desperately wanted to join, but never could quite crack. Richard was new money, loud and brash. The people who used this hangar were old money, silent and invisible. The wind whipped Clara's trench coat around her legs as she walked across the tarmac. Waiting for her was not a standard Learjet, but a Gulfstream GC650ER, painted in a deep midnight blue with a subtle crest on the tail fin, a golden lion rampant. A man in a sharp black suit stood at the bottom of the stairs. He bowed his head slightly as she approached. This was Arthur, the head of royal security for the House of Luxembourg. Mrs. Vance? Arthur said, his voice respectful. Or should I say Ms. Sterling? Sterling. Clara said the name, tasting fresh on her tongue. It was her maiden name, a name she hadn't used since she was 22. Definitely Sterling. Your luggage? I have none, Clara said, patting her purse. I left everything. Very good. Her Highness is eager to see you. She has been distressed regarding the merger. She says she won't sign the final authorization without your eyes on it. Clara nodded and ascended the stairs. The interior of the jet was like a flying 5-star hotel, smelling of jasmine and fresh linen. But Clara didn't stop to admire the luxury. She went straight to the secure communications room at the back of the plane. She sat down, opened a secure laptop, and watched as the screen illuminated her face. She logged into a secure server using a biometric fingerprint scanner. For the world, Clara was a housewife. But in the dark, intersecting worlds of high-level sovereign wealth funds and shadow investing, she was known simply as the architect. 10 years ago, before Richard's ego consumed him, Clara had used her maiden name to make a small, intuitive investment in a European renewable energy grid. That investment had caught the eye of Lady Alara, the Duchess of Luxembourg, and heiress to one of the largest private fortunes in Europe. They had become unlikely pen pals, then digital confidants. Clara had advised Alara on tech portfolios steering the royal family away from disasters and toward unicorns. In return, Alara had offered Clara a safety net, a net Clara had been too proud to use until today. The plane's engines whined as they began to taxi. Clara looked out the window at the gray New York skyline. Ding! A notification popped up on her screen. It was a news alert. Vance Tech stock surges 4% after CEO announces restructuring of personal assets. Richard was already spinning the divorce as a business victory. He was telling the market he had shed dead weight. Clara felt a cold, hard smile touch her lips. She opened a new window on her laptop. It was a live feed of the global stock markets. "Arthur," she called out without turning around. "Yes, Miss Sterling." "Get me the file on the Aurora project, and get me a glass of Pinot Noir. I have some work to do before we land in Paris." "Paris, ma'am?" "Yes," Clara said. "The Royal Gala is tomorrow night. Richard always said I looked terrible in evening gowns. I think it's time to prove him wrong." As the jet lifted off, leaving the gravity of her failed marriage behind, Clara didn't feel heavy. She felt dangerous. Richard had taken the company, yes, but he had forgotten one crucial detail. The patents for the core algorithm, the very heart of Vance Tech, weren't under the company name. They were held by a shell corporation called Sterling Dynamics. A shell corporation Richard had forgotten to ask about in the divorce settlement because he was too busy staring at his mistress. Clara took a sip of the wine Arthur placed beside her. "Let the games begin," she whispered. 48 hours later, Richard Vance woke up with a hangover in his Cabo San Lucas villa. The sun was blazing and the ocean was loud. He reached for his phone expecting congratulations from his frat buddies or updates on the stock price. Instead, he had 47 missed calls, 20 from his PR manager, 15 from his lawyer Henderson, 10 from his board of directors. "What the hell?" he mumbled, sitting up. Bella was still asleep beside him, snoring softly. He opened his messages. The first one was from Henderson: "Do not talk to the press. Call me immediately." Richard frowned. Had the alimony check bounced? He opened Twitter X. Trending #1 worldwide was not Vance Tech. It was not a politician. It was the mystery woman. Richard tapped the hashtag. His heart stopped. The blood drained from his face so fast he felt dizzy. The image was high definition, taken by a professional photographer at the Le Bal des Débutantes in Paris, one of the most exclusive social events on the planet. In the center of the frame was Princess Sophia of Spain and Lady Alara of Luxembourg, two of the most photographed women in Europe. They were laughing, holding champagne flutes, looking radiant in designer couture. But standing between them, linking arms with Lady Alara, was a woman in a dress that looked like it was woven from midnight and starlight. It was a deep emerald velvet gown with a plunging back showing off a figure Richard hadn't really looked at in years. The woman's hair was loose, cascading in waves. She wore a necklace of sapphires that looked heavy enough to sink a yacht. She was laughing, her head thrown back, looking radiant, powerful, and utterly untouchable. It was Clara. Richard rubbed his eyes. It was impossible. Clara was in New Jersey. Clara shopped at Target. Clara was Clara. He scrolled down to the caption from the Daily Mail. Royal Mystery. Who is the stunning brunette laughing with Lady Alara? Insiders say she is the secret weapon behind the Luxembourg Sovereign Fund's recent billions. Sources call her the architect. Is this the new face of European power? No. Richard whispered, his voice trembling. No, no, no. He shook Bella awake. Bella! Look at this! Bella groggily looked at the screen. Her eyes went wide. Is that your ex-wife? It can't be, Richard said, pacing the room naked. She doesn't know anyone in Europe. She doesn't even speak French. But the internet was faster than Richard's denial. @TechWatcher posted, Wait, isn't that Clara Vance? The wife Richard Vance just dumped the one he called dead weight in that leaked memo. @Finance Guru posted, If that is Clara Vance and she's hanging out with the Luxembourg royals, Richard Vance might be the biggest idiot in corporate history. Then the second bomb dropped. A video clip started circulating. It was from the red carpet of the gala. A reporter thrust a microphone toward Lady Alara. "Your Highness, who is your guest tonight?" Lady Alara smiled and pulled Clara closer. Clara looked directly into the camera lens, and Richard felt like she was looking right through his soul. "This," Lady Alara said, her voice crisp and elegant, "this is my dearest friend and business partner, Clara Sterling. She's the woman who saved my family's fortune. And frankly, she's the smartest person in any room she walks into." The reporter asked, "Ms. Sterling, any comment on your recent life changes?" Clara smiled. It was a devastating, serene smile. "I recently dropped some heavy baggage," she said simply. "Now I'm ready to fly." Richard threw his phone across the room. It shattered against the marble wall. "She saved their fortune?" Bella asked, her voice shrill. "Richard, you told me she was a dropout who got lucky marrying you." "Shut up," Richard roared. "She is a dropout. She's nothing." But his hands were shaking, because deep down Richard knew something he had tried to forget. He knew who wrote the code. He knew who fixed the bugs. And he suddenly remembered the Clause 14B in the divorce papers, the one about trade secrets. He scrambled for his laptop. He had to check the patent filings. He logged into the U.S. Patent Office database. He searched for the master algorithm that ran Vance Tech's new AI platform, the product they were launching next week. The product the entire company's value was based on. Owner Sterling Dynamics LLC. Primary signatory Clara E. Sterling. Status license revoked effective immediately upon dissolution of marriage contract. Richard stared at the screen. The air left his lungs. He didn't own his own product. Clara had licensed it to the company for $1 a year as long as they were married. They were no longer married. The phone in the villa started ringing. It was the landline. Richard stared at it like it was a bomb. He answered it slowly. "Mr. Vance." It was Henderson, his lawyer. He sounded like he was hyperventilating. "What is it?" Richard croaked. "We just received a cease and desist order from a law firm in Zurich," Henderson said. "They represent Clara Sterling. She is demanding we shut down the AI servers by midnight tonight, or she's suing for intellectual property theft. Richard, she wants $500 million for the renewal license." Richard dropped the receiver. He looked out at the beautiful Cabo Ocean. Suddenly the water didn't look inviting. It looked like it was rising to swallow him whole. The flight back from Cabo to New York was the longest of Richard Vance's life. He didn't fly private this time. His credit cards had been frozen pending a security audit by the bank, a direct result of the stock plummeting 30% in pre-market trading. He sat in first class on a commercial flight, wedged between a crying baby and a man reading a newspaper with Clara's face on the cover. The headline read, "The Billion-Dollar Ex-Wife." When Richard finally stormed into the Vance Tech headquarters in Manhattan, the atmosphere was apocalyptic. The sleek, open-plan office, usually buzzing with the hum of productivity and the clicking of mechanical keyboards, was chaotic. Phones were ringing off the hook. Literally, the receptionists had taken the handsets off the cradles to stop the noise. "Where is Henderson?" Richard screamed, throwing his suitcase onto the floor of the lobby. Bella, trailing behind him in sweatpants and oversized sunglasses, looked terrified. "Richard, people are staring." "Let them stare, I pay them." He burst into the server room on the 40th floor. The room, usually kept at a frigid temperature to cool the massive banks of processors, was silent. The lights on the server racks, usually a blinking green symphony, were a steady, ominous red. The chief technology officer, a nervous man named Gary, was sitting on the floor with his head in his hands. "Gary," Richard barked, "why is the platform down? Turn it back on." Gary looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "We can't, Richard. It's a kill switch." "Bypass it. You're the CTO, for God's sake." "I didn't write the core kernel, Richard. You know I didn't." "She did." Gary stood up, his voice cracking. "The kill switch is embedded in the root directory. It triggered at midnight Zurich time. It's encrypted with a polymorphic key. Every time we try to crack it, it rewrites itself. It's beautiful code, actually. It's unbreakable." Richard slammed his fist into a metal cabinet, denting it. "It's not beautiful. It's theft. That code belongs to Vance Tech." "Technically," Gary whispered, looking at his shoes, "the metadata says it belongs to Sterling Dynamics. The system is flagging us as pirates. If I try to force a reboot, it threatens to delete the entire user database. We have 3 million users, Richard. If we lose that data, we go to prison for negligence." Richard felt the walls closing in. He retreated to his office, slamming the glass door. Outside, he could see his employees gathered in clumps, whispering. They weren't looking at him with respect anymore. They were looking at him like he was a captain who had steered the Titanic into an iceberg because he was too busy looking in the mirror. Henderson, his lawyer, burst in a moment later. He looked disheveled. "We have a court date," Henderson panted. "Emergency injunction. Tomorrow morning, 9:00 a.m., Southern District of New York." "Good," Richard snarled, pacing the room. "We'll crush her. We'll say she sabotaged the company out of spite. We'll paint her as a bitter, unstable woman who can't handle rejection. The press will eat it up." Henderson loosened his tie, looking pale. "Richard, you don't understand. I tried to serve the papers to her legal team." "So who is it?" "Some strip mall lawyer from Jersey." "No." Henderson said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It's Blackwood, Finch, and Sterling." Richard froze. "Sterling, is that her family?" "No. It's the British firm that handles the Crown estate. They handle the royals, Richard, and they've retained local counsel here." "Who?" "Evelyn Cross." Richard sank into his leather chair. Evelyn Cross wasn't just a lawyer. She was a shark in a Chanel suit. She had dismantled senators, CEOs, and mob bosses. She didn't take divorce cases. "Why would Evelyn Cross take a pro bono divorce case?" Richard asked, bewildered. "It's not pro bono," Henderson said grimly. "And it's not a divorce case anymore. They're countersuing for defamation, fraud, and corporate espionage. They're asking for 51% of Vance Tech as restitution." 51%. Richard laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. "She wants to control me. She wants to be my boss." "No," Henderson said. "She wants to fire you." The steps of the federal courthouse looked like the premiere of a blockbuster movie. Barricades held back a sea of reporters, paparazzi, and curious onlookers. The narrative had shifted overnight. It was no longer tech mogul versus wife. It was the genius hidden in the shadows versus the man who stole her light. When Richard's limousine pulled up, the crowd booed. It was a visceral, angry sound. "Ignore them," Richard muttered to Bella, who was refusing to get out of the car. "I can't go out there," Bella cried. "They're calling me a homewrecker on TikTok. I lost my brand deals. Richard Fashion Nova dropped me this morning." "Get out of the car, Bella," Richard hissed. He dragged her out, forcing a smile for the cameras. He wore his best navy suit, trying to project the image of the confident billionaire, but the sweat on his brow betrayed him. Inside the courtroom, the air was stale and tense. Judge Harrison, a stern man with no patience for theatrics, sat on the bench reviewing the files. Richard and Henderson sat at the plaintiff's table. The defense table was empty. "Where is she?" Richard whispered, checking his watch. "It's 8:59. If she's late, we win by default." "She won't be late," Henderson said, wiping his glasses. At exactly 9:00 a.m., the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The room didn't just go silent. It went still. First came 2 large men in suits, Royal Protection officers. They scanned the room with professional paranoia. Then came Evelyn Cross, looking sharp enough to cut glass, carrying a single thin file folder. And then Clara. Richard almost didn't recognize her. The woman who used to wear oversized sweaters and apologize for taking up space was gone. Clara wore a tailored cream power suit that screamed stealth wealth. Her hair was blown out in a sleek style. She walked with a straight back, her chin held high, but the most striking thing was who walked beside her. It wasn't Lady Alara. It was a man. A tall, distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and a rosette on his lapel. "Is that—" Bella whispered, her eyes wide. "Is that the Duke of Kensington?" "It's Lord Alistair Blackwood." Henderson groaned, putting his head on the table. "He's the Queen's personal solicitor. He flew in for this." Clara walked past Richard's table. She didn't look at him. She didn't acknowledge his existence. The scent of expensive jasmine perfume wafted past him, the same scent he had smelled in the elevator when he thought he had won. "All rise!" the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harrison looked over his spectacles. "Case number 4922 Vance versus Sterling Dynamics. Let's make this quick. Mr. Henderson, you're claiming immediate injunctive relief to turn your servers back on." "Yes, Your Honor." Henderson stood up, his voice shaky. "The defendant, Mrs. Vance, Ms. Sterling has maliciously inserted a kill switch into my client's software, causing millions of dollars in damages daily. This is corporate sabotage." Judge Harrison turned to the defense table. "Ms. Cross." Evelyn Cross stood up. She didn't need notes. "Your Honor, Mr. Henderson is omitting a key fact. Vance Tech does not own the software. They were leasing it. The lease expired the moment Mr. Vance signed the divorce decree. Clause 14b, which Mr. Vance was so eager to enforce regarding his trade secrets, also applies to the intellectual property of the spouse. The contract clearly states, upon dissolution of marriage, all non-shared IP rights revert to their original creator." "That's a technicality," Richard shouted, jumping up. "I built that company." "She just typed what I told her to." "Sit down, Mr. Vance," Judge Harrison snapped. Evelyn Cross smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "If Mr. Vance built it, surely he knows the encryption key to turn it back on. Why does he need Ms. Sterling?" The courtroom chuckled. Even the bailiff smirked. I am the vision guy," Richard stammered. "I don't deal with the code monkeys." A gasp went through the room. Calling Clara, and by extension the entire tech workforce, code monkeys was a fatal PR error. Clara finally spoke. She didn't stand up. She just leaned into the microphone. "Your Honor," her voice was calm, melodic. "May I approach the bench with a piece of evidence?" "You may." Clara stood up. She walked to the judge and handed him a USB drive and a single piece of paper. "This is the original commit log from GitHub," Clara said, turning to look at Richard for the first time. Her eyes were cold fire. Dated November 2012, 3 years before Vance Tech was incorporated. It shows the creation of the Aurora algorithm. The user ID is CS's architect. The timestamp matches the IP address of a small coffee shop in Hoboken where I worked 2 jobs to pay for Richard's student loans. She paused, letting that sink in. "And this," she pointed to the paper, "is an email from Richard dated 2 days ago. In it, he refers to me as dead weight and brags about securing a clean break. I am simply giving him what he wanted, a clean break. He has his company name. I have my code. If he wants to use my property, he can pay the licensing fee." "Which is?" the judge asked. $500 million, Clara said. "Non-negotiable." "That's extortion," Richard screamed. "That's half the company's value." Lord Alistair Blackwood, the royal solicitor, stood up. His voice was like refined gravel. "Your Honor, if I may, we are prepared to offer an alternative." The room leaned in. "Ms. Sterling is willing to unlock the servers immediately," Lord Alistair said. "See?" Richard grinned. "They're folding on one condition," Lord Alistair continued. "Richard Vance must resign as CEO immediately. He must liquidate his majority shareholding, and the board of directors must appoint a new interim CEO." Richard felt the blood rush to his ears. Who do you think can run my company better than me?" Lord Alistair gestured to Clara. "The person who built it," he said. Richard looked at the board members sitting in the gallery. They were the men and women he had wined and dined for years. He expected them to stand up and defend him. Instead, the chairman of the board, a man named Mr. Sterling, no relation, but the irony stung, stood up. He looked at Richard with disdain. "We accept the condition," the chairman said. "What?" Richard gasped. "You can't. I own 40%. "Actually," the chairman said, "you triggered a bad actor clause in our bylaws when your stock plummeted due to personal misconduct. We held an emergency vote at 8:00 a.m. You're out, Richard." Richard Vance stood alone in the crowded courtroom. His lawyer looked away. His fiancée was scrolling through TikTok, ignoring him. Clara stood tall, flanked by the might of the British legal system and the Luxembourg Treasury. "Do we have a deal, Mr. Vance?" Clara asked softly. Richard looked at the judge. The judge nodded. He looked at the board. They were stone-faced. He looked at Clara. He realized then that he had never really known her. He had lived with her for 12 years, but he had never seen her. He saw her now, and she was terrifying. "Fine," Richard whispered, his voice broken. "Take it. Take it all." "I'm not taking it, Richard," Clara said, smoothing her jacket. "I'm repossessing it." As the gavel banged, signaling the end of Richard's reign, the courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Clara didn't answer them. She turned to Lord Alistair and Evelyn Cross. "Lunch?" she asked. "I believe Lady Alara has a table at Le Bernardin." Lord Alistair smiled. "She's dying to hear how the vision guy took the news." They walked out, leaving Richard slumped in his chair, a king without a kingdom, while the cameras flashed blindingly in his face. The sidewalk outside the Southern District Court of New York was cold, but Richard Vance felt a heat rising in his neck that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the heat of absolute humiliating exposure. He watched the black SUVs carrying Clara and the royal entourage peel away, disappearing into the city traffic like phantoms. He was left standing on the curb with Henderson, his lawyer, and Bella. "So," Richard said, his voice sounding hollow, "we appeal." "Right, Henderson?" "We find a loophole. The judge was biased. We can say—" Henderson snapped his briefcase shut with a finality that sounded like a gunshot. "There is no appeal, Richard. You admitted to the terms in open court. You signed the resignation. It's over. I'll send you the bill for my services." "Bill?" Richard grabbed Henderson's arm. "You lost the case. You're not getting a dime until I fix this." Henderson pulled his arm away, brushing his sleeve as if Richard were contagious. "I didn't lose the case, Richard. You lost the company years ago when you decided your wife was an employee. My retainer is empty. Good luck." Henderson hailed a cab and vanished. Richard turned to Bella. She was staring at her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. "Babe," Richard said, forcing a smile. "Don't worry, it's a setback. I'm Richard Vance. I built it once, I'll build it again. We'll go to Cabo Regroup. I have some offshore accounts that—" "Richard Moe," Bella interrupted, not looking up. "The cards are declined." "What?" "I tried to order an Uber Black to get us out of here. Declined. Then I tried to buy a latte at the Starbucks across the street while you were yelling at the judge. Declined. Insufficient funds." "It's just a freeze," Richard pleaded. "The bank is just spooked. I'll call them." Bella finally looked up. The adoration that used to be in her eyes, the look Richard called love, but was actually just ambition, was gone. In its place was cold, hard calculation. She looked at Richard's sweating face, his slightly crumpled suit, the desperation in his eyes. "You're broke, aren't you?" she asked flatly. "Like actually broke. The liquidity event, it's not happening. It's temporary." "I'm 24, Richard," Bella said, sliding her sunglasses down her nose. "I don't do temporary broke. I signed up for the yacht life, not the let's build it again in a garage life." She reached into her purse, the Birkin bag Richard had bought her last week, and pulled out the engagement ring. It was a 5-carat oval diamond. She looked at it for a second, then slipped it back onto her finger. "I'm keeping this," she said. "Consider it severance." "Bella, wait." Richard reached for her. "Don't." she snapped, stepping back. I just texted Tyler. He's picking me up. Tyler, my VP of sales. He's the interim VP of sales, Bella corrected. And rumor has it Clara is keeping him on because he actually hit his quotas. Unlike you. A sleek Porsche pulled up to the curb. Tyler, a man Richard had hired straight out of college, sat behind the wheel. He didn't look at Richard. He just unlocked the passenger door. Bella hopped in. Bye, Richard. Good luck with the whatever this is. The Porsche sped off. Richard Vance stood alone. He checked his pockets. He had his phone, a pack of gum, and $40 in cash. The wind picked up, blowing a discarded newspaper against his leg. He looked down. It was the Financial Times. The headline read, "The Queen is back. Clara Sterling takes the throne." Meanwhile, 40 floors up in the building that used to bear Richard's name, the atmosphere was electric. Clara walked out of the elevator. She had changed out of her court suit into something more functional, a black turtleneck, dark jeans, and boots. She didn't look like a CEO. She looked like a commander. The entire staff was gathered in the lobby. These were people who had spent the last 3 years terrified of Richard's mood swings. They looked at Clara with a mixture of awe and fear. Was she going to fire everyone? Was she going to liquidate the assets? Clara stopped in the center of the room. She looked at the faces. She knew every single one of them. She knew that Sarah in accounting had a sick mother. She knew that David in engineering was working on a side project that could revolutionize data compression, but Richard had forbidden him from working on it. I'm not going to make a speech, Clara said, her voice projecting clearly without a microphone. You all know the code. You know the product. For the last 5 years, you've been led by a man who cared more about the stock price than the software. That ends today. She walked over to the wall behind the reception desk where a massive backlit portrait of Richard Vance hung. Arthur, she said. The royal security guard stepped forward holding a crowbar. With a satisfying crack, he pried the portrait off the wall. It crashed to the floor, glass shattering. The room gasped. We are no longer Vance Tech, Clara announced. We are reverting to the original project name. Welcome to Aurora Systems. She turned to David, the terrified engineer in the back. David, bring your compression project to my office in 10 minutes. We're shipping it next quarter. David's jaw dropped. Really? Yes. Clara smiled. And Sarah. Take the rest of the week off to be with your mom. Full pay. For a second there was silence. Then someone started clapping, then another. Within seconds the room was roaring with applause. It wasn't polite applause. It was the sound of a crew realizing they finally had a captain who knew how to sail. But Clara didn't stay to bask in it. She walked into the CEO's office, Richard's sanctuary. She looked at the expensive Scotch collection, the ego-stroking awards, the golf clubs. Get rid of it all, she told her assistant. I want a standing desk, 3 monitors, and a coffee machine that actually works. She sat down at the empty desk. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Lady Alara. Sent, the board is happy. The stock is up 12%. But watch your back, darling. The sharks smell blood. Silas Thorne just landed in New York. Clara's eyes narrowed. Silas Thorne, the CEO of Omnicorp, the man known as the Butcher of Wall Street. He had been trying to buy Vance Tech for years, but Richard was too proud to sell. Now Silas likely thought a woman in charge meant the company was weak. Clara cracked her knuckles. Let him come, she whispered. 6 months after the fall of Richard Vance, the landscape of Clara Sterling's life had shifted from the steel canyons of Manhattan to the rugged, unforgiving peaks of the American West. The meeting had been set for Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It was a power move, pure and simple. Silas Thorne, the CEO of Omnicorp and a man the financial press affectionately called the Butcher of Wall Street, didn't come to New York for meetings. He made people come to him. He wanted them jet-lagged, freezing, and out of their element. Clara's private car, a reinforced SUV with snow tires, crunched up the winding gravel driveway of the Thorne Legacy Ranch. Outside, a blizzard was raging. The wind howled through the Teton Range, whipping snow into blinding white sheets that slammed against the vehicle. "The pilot says we need to be wheels up by 4:00 p.m., Ms. Sterling." "Arthur," her head of security said from the front seat, "the storm is getting worse." "We won't need that long, Arthur," Clara replied, looking out the window at the massive log cabin looming ahead. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. "Silas thinks this is a negotiation. It's not." Clara stepped out of the car, the biting cold instantly stinging her cheeks. She wasn't wearing the business suits of New York anymore. She wore a heavy, cream-colored wool coat, dark denim, and lined leather boots. She looked less like a tech CEO and more like someone who had come to hunt. Inside the lodge was a temple to masculine aggression. The walls were lined with the mounted heads of elk bears and bison. A fire roared in a stone hearth large enough to stand in. Silas Thorne sat at the head of a 20-foot table made of reclaimed redwood. He was exactly as the magazines described him, 60 years old, massive shoulders, a face weathered by wind and whiskey, and a cowboy hat that he wore indoors without a hint of irony. Flanking him were 3 lawyers in identical gray suits looking like nervous penguins in the rustic setting. "Well, well," Silas boomed, his voice gravelly and deep. He didn't stand up. "The Queen of Code made it through the snow. I thought you city types melted if the temperature dropped below 40. "I grew up in New Jersey, Mr. Thorne," Clara said, pulling off her leather gloves finger by finger. "We handle the cold just fine. It's the hot air we have trouble with." Silas chuckled, but his eyes remained cold. He gestured to the empty chair at the opposite end of the long table. "Sit. Drink." He pushed a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle bourbon toward her. "Water," Clara said, sitting down. "Suit yourself." Silas poured himself a generous glass. "Let's cut the pleasantries, Clara. I know you're busy running Aurora Systems. Cute company. Nice software. But let's be real, you're a minnow swimming in an ocean full of sharks. And I'm the biggest shark there is." He snapped his fingers. One of the gray-suited lawyers slid a thick document across the table. "That's a buyout offer," Silas said, leaning back and chewing on an unlit cigar. $80 a share. Cash. That's a 30% premium over your current valuation. You take the money, you walk away a billionaire, and you go live in a castle with your princess friend in Luxembourg. You let the big boys handle the heavy lifting of global logistics." Clara didn't pick up the document. She didn't even look at it. She looked at Silas. For 15 years before she was the wife of a tech mogul or the CEO of a billion-dollar company, Clara had been a waitress at the Rusty Spoon. It was a dive bar where truck drivers, politicians, and liars congregated. You learned things waiting tables. You learned to read the micro-expressions that people couldn't hide. She watched Silas's hand as he held his cigar. There was a tremor, a tiny rhythmic shaking. She looked at the lawyer on the left. He was sweating despite the drafty room. He kept checking his watch, tapping his foot. They were terrified. $80 a share is incredibly generous, Clara said softly. Her voice was calm, contrasting with the howling wind outside. "It's the offer of a lifetime," Silas grunted. "But it expires when you walk out that door." "Why?" Clara asked. "Why what? Why the rush?" Clara stood up and walked over to the fireplace, warming her hands. "You dragged me 2,000 miles into a blizzard to sign a deal that could have been an email. You're offering me a premium on a company you claimed was cute and small. You're the butcher of Wall Street, Silas. You don't overpay. You strip assets." "I'm feeling charitable," Silas sneered. "Maybe I have a soft spot for charity cases." Clara turned around. The firelight cast long shadows across her face. "I don't think that's it. I think you're bleeding, Silas, and you need a tourniquet." Silas slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Watch your tone, girl. I own half the logistics networks in North America. And what good are trucks if you have nothing to put in them?" Clara reached into her coat pocket. She didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. She tossed it onto the table. It slid all the way down, stopping right in front of Silas's whiskey glass. "That," Clara said, "is a preliminary report from the United Nations Trade Council. It's not public yet. It won't be public for another 48 hours. Silas stared at the paper. He didn't touch it. It details the immediate sanctioning of the Kivu cobalt mines in the Congo due to human rights violations. Clara continued, walking slowly back to the table. My sources tell me Omnicorp sources 85% of its cobalt from those specific mines. Without that cobalt, your battery division, the crown jewel of your empire, stops production by Friday. The silence in the room was deafening. The lawyers looked at their shoes. Silas's face went a shade of purple that matched the veins in his nose. You're bluffing, Silas rasped. Am I? Clara leaned in, placing her hands on the table. Your stock is trading at $120 right now. When this news hits on Monday morning, it will drop to $40. You'll be insolvent within the quarter. You aren't trying to buy Aurora because you want my company, Silas. You're trying to buy me because my new compression algorithm reduces battery load by 40%. You need my tech to stretch your existing supply until you can find a new source. I am the only oxygen mask in the room, and you are suffocating. Silas looked at his lawyer. The lawyer gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The butcher slumped in his chair. The cowboy hat suddenly looked like a costume prop. The arrogance evaporated, leaving behind a tired, desperate old man. What do you want? Silas whispered. A higher price per share, 100. I don't want your money, Clara said. I'm not selling Aurora. Not today, not ever. Then why are you here? I'm here to make an acquisition. Clara pulled a second document from her coat. She placed it in front of him. I need a global distribution network, she said casually. I have the software, but I lack the hardware. You have a fleet of 5,000 trucks and cargo planes that are about to be useless because you have no batteries to ship. I'm buying your North American logistics division. You want my trucks? Silas sputtered. That's the backbone of my company. It was the backbone, Clara corrected. Now it's a liability. I'll buy it for pennies on the dollar. The cash injection will give Omnicorp enough liquidity to pivot your supply chain and survive the sanctions. You stay in business. I go global. It's a win-win. And if I say no, then I walk out that door, Clara said, buttoning her coat. I fly back to New York, and on Monday morning I watch Omnicorp turn into dust on the Bloomberg terminal. She checked her watch. The pilot said we have to leave soon. You have 5 minutes, Silas. Silas Thorne looked at the woman standing before him. He had underestimated her. Everyone had. Richard Vance had thought she was a trophy. The press had thought she was a lucky divorcee. Silas had thought she was a weak girl. They were all wrong. She was a grandmaster. Silas picked up his fountain pen. His hand was still shaking, but this time it was out of rage, not fear. He scrawled his signature on the document. You're a hard woman, Clara Sterling, he muttered, tossing the pen down. Clara picked up the contract, checking the signature with a meticulous eye. She tucked it into her coat. I had to be, she said. I spent 12 years married to a man who told me I was nothing. You learn to be hard or you break. She turned to leave, her boots clicking on the hardwood floor. At the heavy oak door she paused. Oh, and Silas. What? He growled. The Pappy Van Winkle. She nodded at the bottle. It's a fake. The color is off. You might want to check your supplier on that, too. She walked out into the storm, leaving the butcher of Wall Street staring at his glass, wondering how he had just lost everything to a woman who used to serve coffee. 2 years later. The rain in Jersey City was relentless. It washed the grime off the sidewalks, but did little to clean the soul of the city. In a small, run-down diner on the corner of 4th and Main, the air smelled of stale grease and despair. It was 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. The place was empty, save for a single customer in the back booth. Behind the counter, a man in a stained white apron was scraping gum off the underside of a table. He looked older than 45. His hair was thinning rapidly, his face gaunt, his eyes carrying the dull glaze of someone who had stopped dreaming. The bell above the door chimed. Kitchen's closed, the man grunted, not looking up. Only coffee and pie left. Coffee is fine. Black. The man froze. His hand gripping the scraper went rigid. He knew that voice. It was a voice from a lifetime ago. A voice he had heard in his sleep for 2 years. Richard Vance slowly stood up. Standing at the counter was Clara. She looked radiant. She wore a simple trench coat, but she wore it like royal robes. Her hair was pulled back, revealing a face that had only grown more beautiful with age and with power. Richard looked around nervously, wiping his hands on his dirty apron. Is this a joke?" he stammered. "Are you filming this? Is Bella outside with a camera crew?" "Bella lives in Miami now, Richard," Clara said gently. "She married that plastic surgeon. I heard they're very happy." Richard winced. "Right. I knew that." He poured the coffee. His hands shook so badly that a splash of hot liquid hit the counter. He scrambled to wipe it up with a rag. I'm just helping out here," he lied, his voice cracking. "Between projects, just keeping busy. The market is tough right now." Clara looked around the dingy diner. She saw the Help Wanted sign in the window. She saw the studio apartment key on Richard's belt loop. She saw the holes in his shoes. She didn't humiliate him. She didn't mock him. She simply took a sip of the coffee. "It's good coffee," she said. Richard looked at her, tears welling in his eyes. "Clara, why are you here? You won. You have the company. You have the billions. You have the royal friends. Why come back to this dump to see me?" "I was in the neighborhood," Clara said. "We're breaking ground on the new Aurora Youth Center down the street. I wanted to see where we started." "Where we started," Richard whispered. "I'm sorry, Clara. I never said it. But I am. I'm sorry I didn't see you." Clara placed the cup down. She reached into her purse and pulled out a $20 bill. She placed it on the counter. "You saw what you wanted to see, Richard," she said softly. "You wanted a reflection. I wanted a partner. We were never reading the same book." She turned to leave. "Clara?" Richard called out, desperation in his voice. "Did you plan it? The photo? The gala? Did you plan to ruin me?" Clara stopped at the door, the neon sign buzzing above her head. She looked back at the man she had once promised to love forever. "I didn't plan to ruin you, Richard," she said. "I just planned to stop letting you ruin me. You did the rest yourself." She pushed the door open. Outside, a convoy of black SUVs waited in the rain. An agent held an umbrella for her. She stepped into the back seat of the lead car where Lady Ilara was waiting with a smile. "Ready, my friend?" Ilara asked. "Ready," Claire replied. As the car pulled away, splashing through the puddles, Richard Vance stood in the window of the diner watching the taillights fade into the darkness. He looked down at the $20 bill on the counter. It was the biggest tip he had made all month. Clara Sterling didn't just sign divorce papers. She signed a Declaration of Independence. In a world that constantly tried to tell her who she was, a wife, a victim, a subordinate, she chose to show them who she really was, the architect. Richard learned the hard way that when you underestimate the quiet ones, you don't hear the train coming until it's already run you over. What do you think? Did Richard deserve to end up pouring coffee? Or was his punishment too harsh? And would you have accepted the payout from Silas, or would you have gone for the throat like Clara? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma, betrayal, and ultimate triumph, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. We have a new underdog revenge saga dropping next week that involves a mechanic, a mafia princess, and a missing lottery ticket. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching.